May 16, 1961. Seoul, South Korea. The army enters the capital, at its head, Park Chung-hee. Tired of the inefficiency, corruption, and instability of the newly appointed democratic government, Park seizes power in a coup d'etat. In front of him, one of the poorest countries in the world. Koreans live in huts. Less than 10% have access to electricity. Some go days without eating. Across the border, North Korea. 8 years earlier, the war between the two, the Korean War, had killed up to 4 million people. A race between the two Koreas and their allies begins. Whoever rebuilds faster may win the next war and reunify the peninsula under his own ideology. Under Park Chung-hee, poverty becomes a national emergency. Factories become the new battlefields. Workers, the economic soldiers. Through brutal determination, ruthless control, 10 to 16-hour workdays, night classes after factory shifts, and military discipline, he will force Koreans to carry out one of the fastest economic transformations the world has ever seen. Born in a thatched hut in Korea under Japanese occupation, Park Chung-hee grows up in a family trapped in extreme poverty, where he sometimes goes days without food. At school, he is mocked for his worn-out, heavily patched clothes, poor shoes, empty lunchboxes, no notebooks, and for not having money to buy snacks like the other children. Teachers constantly single him out for overdue payments. One evening, a classmate finds him in tears because he is being sent home to collect his tuition fees, even though he already knows his family will have no money to give him. Through a letter written in blood, he manages to enter a Japanese military academy. He becomes a soldier of the Japanese Empire under the name Takagi Masao. For the first time in his life, he experiences dignity and status. In Japanese-occupied Manchuria, Park serves as an officer. He learns Japanese. His loyalty helps him rise through the ranks. When World War II ends, Japan loses control of Korea, and the peninsula is divided along the 38th parallel. Soviet-backed communist forces occupy the north. American-backed anti-communist forces occupy the south. Park, accused of belonging to a communist cell inside the military, is almost executed by the South Korean government. But then, supplied with Soviet weapons, North Korea invades the South in 1950 with the goal of reunifying the peninsula under communism. Suddenly, competent military men like Park are needed. He joins the South Korean army, and his rank keeps rising. After 3 years of war, South Korea, backed by the United Nations, and above all by the United States, survives. Not only that, it even advances deep into the north. Chinese intervention, however, prevents a full southern victory. The war ends in a stalemate near the 38th parallel, almost exactly where it began. The two sides sign an armistice. They agree to stop the war, but both know it could restart at any moment, as soon as one side feels ready enough to resume it. In the north, Supreme Leader Kim Il-sung consolidates total power. In the south, Syngman Rhee rules as a dictator until 1960, when mass pro-democracy protests force him to resign. After one brief year of democracy, Park seizes power through a coup d'etat. When Park wins the presidential election of 1963, South Korea is the poorer Korea. During the colonial period, Japan had built much of the peninsula's railways, power plants, heavy industry, and infrastructure in the north to support its war against China in Manchuria. North Korea inherited all of that. Since the end of the Korean War, moreover, the Soviet Union and China have also been helping North Korea rebuild quickly with loans and industrial support. Park knows it is only a matter of time before Kim Il-sung comes back for round two. American troops are still stationed in the south to protect South Korea, but who can guarantee that a future American president will not pull them out? Park understands that South Korea cannot depend on the United States forever, that it must develop faster than the North in order to survive. So he finds two ways to achieve that. First, Vietnam. In 1964, Park sends South Korean troops to fight in Vietnam. The official reason, fighting communism. The real reason, money. In the United States, public opposition to the war in Vietnam is enormous. Americans do not want their citizens dying abroad. So the U.S. government begins paying soldiers from allied countries to add numbers to the war. Park jumps on the opportunity. At home, A South Korean soldier costs the government $1.60 a month in salary, or $16 today. But if Park sends him to Vietnam, the United States pays him $37.50 a month, or $385 today. For a country where the median worker still earns $2 a month, this becomes a gold rush. Soldiers' remittances dramatically increase their families' consumption back home. At the same time, they bring badly needed foreign currency into the country. Suddenly, destroying Vietnam has become the most patriotic and efficient way to build Korea. Over the course of the war, South Korea becomes the second largest foreign military presence in Vietnam after the United States, with 320,000 personnel serving there. For Korea, Vietnam becomes an enormously profitable business. The United States sends billions in payments, loans, subsidies, and technology transfers. The more South Korea commits to the war, the faster it develops. Second, Japan. In 1965, Park signs a treaty normalizing relations between South Korea and its former colonizer Japan, a country that, until then, had been treated as Korea's enemy. Through this treaty, Japan agrees to pay South Korea the equivalent of about $3 billion today as compensation for the suffering it inflicted on Koreans during colonial rule, along with another $5 billion in loans, contracts, and technology transfers. This may seem small, but considering that at this time, South Korea's entire economy is worth barely $33 billion in inflation-adjusted terms, it is a fortune, an enormous amount of money, and above all, a close relationship with a country rapidly becoming a global economic superpower. With the money generated by the Vietnam War and the compensation from Japan, by 1965, Park finally has everything he needs to drag South Korea out of poverty. Inside the country, Park Chung-hee's economic reforms begin as soon as he seizes power in 1961. To align Korea with global economic standards, the first thing he does is force the country to adopt meters and grams, banning traditional Korean units such as the pyong. That same year, he creates the Economic Planning Board. Then in 1962, he launches South Korea's first five-year plan. On the surface, it looks as if he is borrowing from the communist playbook, the Soviet five-year plans, where the state intervenes directly in the economy, setting priorities, targets, and the methods to achieve them. But South Korea is capitalist. Park chooses this approach because he believes Korea has no time to wait for the chaos of the market to somehow make the country rich overnight. Development to Park has to be forced, accelerated, and directed. The efforts of companies and citizens coordinated toward the same goals. So the government steps in and begins telling everyone what to do. Electricity is almost non-existent, so the state must create a national electrical grid to connect households and businesses to reliable 24-hour power. The country is suffering from chronic hunger, so farmers' productivity must improve to feed Korea. Much of the country still depends on dusty paths that turn into mud whenever it rains, so the government must build roads, railways, and ports, allowing people and goods to move across the country as quickly as possible. And above all, South Korea must build an industry focused on exports so it can earn money in international markets. Park, however, does not want Korea to produce clothes and basic goods. Other countries could easily outcompete Korea in that. No, he wants Korea to produce heavy equipment, machinery, and, why not, even cars and ships. When he asks the World Bank and the IMF how to achieve this, the two institutions tell him, Korea has no natural resources, Korea has no infrastructure, and Koreans have no technical knowledge to make it possible. Heavy industry is impossible if you don't develop light industry first. Park ignores them. To ensure maximum involvement of the government in the country's economic affairs, Park places the Economic Planning Board at the top to direct the economy. The planning board sets targets, priorities, controls budgets, directs banks, and mobilizes companies from top to bottom. Whatever change the country needs, everyone must cooperate. Whoever refuses or fails to keep up is abandoned to his misery. Park knows that giving every business a fair chance to grow would create a healthier economy, but South Korea does not have time for that. North Korea may strike at any moment, so he turns to a small group of people who already have money, connections, and proven business experience, the richest families in Korea. Hyundai, a construction and logistics company, Samsung, a trading company, LG, a cosmetics company, and other families with enough capital and ambition. Inspired by the Japanese keiretsu, large business groups connected through banks, suppliers, and long-term cooperation, and by the older zaibatsu, the vertically integrated conglomerates of Imperial Japan, Park develops South Korea's own version of it, the chaebols. To the chaebols, Park shows what the country needs. Whoever among them can meet state targets will be rewarded with cheap loans, tax breaks, subsidies, and more. The more and the faster they help Korea develop, the more the government will help them become bigger. Like octopuses, the chaebols, backed by total government support, begin spreading their tentacles into every sector of the economy. Within a single generation, family businesses that once sold sugar, toothpaste, or face cream become industrial empires. Hyundai builds Korea's roads, apartments, highways, and ports. Samsung becomes Korea's insurer and one of the engines of its technological rise. LG becomes Korea's chemical engine and begins producing Korea's first radios, TVs, and other consumer goods of everyday life. Factories boom, and Koreans begin flooding into the cities in search of jobs. Before the 1967 presidential election, Park promises that if the country elects him a second time, he will not seek a third term. As soon as he is re-elected, he asks Parliament to change the Constitution so that the president, meaning himself, can run for a third term. To finance his plans, Park asks the World Bank and the IMF for support. The two institutions, again, refuse to lend him money and advise him not to pursue his plans. Park ignores them. In 1967, he launches the second five-year plan. With the money from the Vietnam War and the treaty with Japan, he creates the state-owned Pohang Iron and Steel Company, also known as POSCO, to provide cheap steel to the chaebols. To provide resources and feed chaebol expansion, Park builds alliances around the world. With Iran, he secures oil imports. With Australia, India, and Brazil, he secures the raw materials needed to keep Korean factories running. To reduce illiteracy and simplify education, Park also pushes for the removal of Hanja. Until then, Korean was written like Japanese, a mixture of local alphabet and Chinese characters. Park moves the country toward full Koreanization. Children from all backgrounds, no matter how poor they are, must study. Education becomes intense, competitive, and increasingly focused on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The system, however, is not designed to create independent or creative thinkers, but obedient, skilled workers for the chaebols. As the economy is fully oriented toward exports, Korean companies and workers have no choice but to become competitive by international standards. Working abroad also becomes a patriotic duty. Miners and nurses are sent to West Germany. Architects, engineers, and construction workers are sent by the millions to work on mega projects, skyscrapers, and ports built by chaebols like Hyundai across the Middle East. In the emerging factories, workers, often including children, cram into dormitories, work shifts of 10 to 16 hours, and attend night classes to recover the education they lost to poverty. They work in unsafe workshops where exhaustion and accidents become part of daily life. Park does nothing to improve their lives. On the contrary, he silences unions, represses workers' strikes, keeps salaries low to help the chaebols expand faster, and treats work as a patriotic sacrifice. Things go so far out of control that in 1970, John Tae-il, a 22-year-old textile worker, sets himself on fire in Seoul, shouting, "We are not machines." Problems with the North, meanwhile, persist. Between 1966 and 1969, hundreds die in skirmishes at the DMZ. On January 21, 1968, 31 men are discovered trying to infiltrate the presidential residence in Seoul. They are stopped just in time. They are Unit 124, 31 North Korean commandos sent by Kim Il-sung to assassinate Park. As retaliation, Park creates Unit 684, a team of 31 homeless men, hooligans, and petty criminals trained for 3 years to assassinate Kim Il-sung. When relations with the North begin to improve, however, the mission is canceled and the unit is abandoned. Feeling betrayed after years of brutal training, isolation on Silmito Island, and many of them dying in bizarre ways, They mutiny, kill their guards, escape the island, hijack a bus, and head towards Seoul to seek revenge against the authorities. Before being stopped and killed by the military, the survivors later executed by the government. In 1969, U.S. President Richard Nixon declares the Guam Doctrine. The U.S. will maintain its troops in Asia, but no longer fight every war for its allies. For South Korea, this is terrible news. Park knows that he needs to run faster. In the 1971 election, Park Chung-hee defeats Kim Dae-jung and wins the presidency for the third consecutive term. Under the existing constitution, this is supposed to be his last. But Park knows South Korea is not a developed country yet. The country still needs him. So in 1972, he declares martial law, dissolves the National Assembly, and forces the country to approve his new Yushin constitution. From now on, he can be re-elected indefinitely for 6-year terms. Then things proceed as usual. Forced modernization, but now with a focus on the citizens themselves. His Saemaul Undong, the New Village movement, launched in 1970, starts bringing electricity, running water, better roads, and modernization to the Korean countryside. People wake up to Saemaul bells and propaganda songs. Adults join village cleaning campaigns and construction work. During the rat eradication campaigns, children kill rats, bring their tails to school, and receive rewards. Because white rice is scarce, he encourages people to mix rice with barley and other grains. Exactly the kind of food he had eaten as a poor child. Teachers inspect students' lunchboxes, and children who bring only white rice are scolded for being unpatriotic. Around 30,000 villages are given bags of cement and told to improve themselves. Then they are evaluated. Competition is fierce. Villages that show the best results receive more cement and more government support. Thatched houses especially become his enemy. They remind him of his childhood and poverty. Over time, 2.6 million households replace their traditional roofs with slate containing asbestos, preferably painted red or blue, so that anyone driving on the highways can see a country in full modernization. A nationwide curfew runs from midnight to 4 a.m. Anyone found on the streets is arrested. He tells families to have fewer children and to raise them better. Women are not allowed to wear miniskirts. Men are forbidden from appearing in public with long hair. By 1973, tens of thousands of men are stopped by police for hair violations and taken to police stations for a quick haircut. Through the heavy and chemical industry drive of 1973, Park decides that Korea's economic development will revolve around steel, petrochemicals, automobiles, machine tools, shipbuilding, and electronics. LG creates Korea's first TVs, washing machines, air conditioners, shampoos, toothpaste, and cosmetics. Samsung Electronics produces its first TV, a 12-inch black and white vacuum tube television, and by 1974 launches its first refrigerator, the SR-180. Hyundai builds the Seoul-Busan Expressway, starts building oil tankers in Ulsan, and by 1975 creates Korea's first mass-produced car, the Pony. Inside the country, however, despite these enormous economic results, internationally celebrated as the miracle on the Han River, tension is higher than ever. The 1973 oil shock begins, prices rise, and ordinary Koreans are the ones paying the highest price, with exhausting hours and miserable wages, all while the chaebols profit enormously. Workers protest, but they end up in jail. The opposition is not really allowed to exist either. Kim Dae-jung, the man who almost defeated Park in the 1971 election, is kidnapped in Tokyo in 1973 by Korean intelligence agents. He is tied up, dragged onto a boat, and almost thrown into the sea. The case, however, explodes into an international scandal, and due to pressure from Japan and the United States, his life is spared. Then come the leftists. In 1974, under the excuse of fighting communist subversion, Park's regime arrests hundreds of dissidents, students, and opposition figures in the so-called People's Revolutionary Party case. Many are tortured. 8 of them are later executed. From top to bottom, nobody is safe. Poet Kim Chi-ha writes 5 Bandits, a satire about an alliance of businessmen, generals, bureaucrats, lawmakers, and prosecutors, all protected by a former officer of the Japanese Imperial Army. a figure clearly modeled on Park himself. Park understands the joke, but he does not laugh. The magazine that publishes it, Sasangye, is shut down, and Kim is sentenced to death. Due to public protests, he is later released, but after he speaks publicly about how he had been tortured in prison, Park sends him to prison again, this time for life. When censorship becomes too embarrassing to show directly, Park's government learns to censor indirectly. In 1974, the newspaper Dong-A-Ilbo begins resisting government pressure to censor itself. Instead of shutting it down, the regime pressures advertisers to withdraw their ads, trying to kill the newspaper financially. But the newspaper keeps printing anyway, leaving empty white spaces where the advertisements should have been. Readers understand what is happening and begin buying small solidarity ads with sentences such as, "Stay strong, we are with you." The most shocking event, however, happens on August 15, 1974. At the National Theater in Seoul, Park is delivering a speech when Moon Sig-won, a Japan-born Korean with pro-North Korean sympathies, rises from his seat and fires at him. He misses Park, but hits Park's wife, Yuk Young-soo. Moon is immediately captured. Even as his wife is carried away from the stage, Park keeps delivering his speech. Only later does he discover that she has died in the hospital. He would later write that he cried for months and that losing her was the worst event of his life. Moon is sentenced to death and executed by hanging 4 months later. In 1975, as South Korea tries to present itself as a respectable country, Park orders the streets to be cleaned of anyone who might embarrass the country. Beggars, homeless people, street vendors, children selling snacks or tickets. Police officers, helped by shop owners, round them up and send them to detention and labor facilities. In 1978, the only candidate in the presidential election, Park Chung-hee, becomes president again with 100% of the votes. Many are not happy about this. In August 1979, hundreds of female workers from the YH Trading Company, a wig manufacturer in Seoul, occupy the headquarters of the opposition New Democratic Party. Their company has just closed and their wages are unpaid. 2,000 riot police storm the building and violently evict them. One worker, Kim Kyung-suk, dies. Her death turns into a national political crisis. The opposition accuses Park of murder and repression. Park responds by expelling opposition leader Kim Young-sam from the National Assembly. The anger spreads first to Busan, then to Masan, where students and citizens pour into the streets, attack police stations, burn government buildings, and call for the end of the Yushin dictatorship. Park sends in martial law troops. On October 26, 1979, during a private dinner, Park argues with the director of the Korean intelligence agency, his close friend, Kim Jae-gyu, about how to handle the protests. Kim says Park cannot continue like this. Park refuses to listen. The man who spent years protecting him pulls out a gun. Park is shot twice. By 1979, just 18 years after Park's rise to power in 1961, South Korea had already become a middle-income country. People now had electricity. People now had food. Literacy had reached 90%. Extreme poverty had fallen from 66 to just 11%. And child mortality had fallen by 64%. The economy itself had grown by 6 times and wages by 4 times. In 1969, only 6% of households had a television. By 1979, in just 10 years, 80% of Korean households had one. Today, South Korea is the 4th largest economy in Asia and the 13th largest economy in the world. Immensely wealthy, especially compared to its brother in the north. Ulsan, the industrial city developed under Park Chung-hee in 1962, now hosts the world's largest single automobile manufacturing plant, producing 1.6 million cars a year, the 3rd largest oil refinery, and Hyundai Heavy Industries, the world's largest shipbuilding company. What had once been a poor fishing town is now a global industrial hub. Samsung now rivals American tech giants like Apple. Korean music fills stadiums around the world. Korean films and series are watched from Latin America to Europe, from the Middle East to Southeast Asia, a country that, just a few decades earlier, was struggling to feed its own people, and where many still lived in huts, now exports cars, ships, phones, semiconductors, and culture. Park Chung-hee was given a state funeral and buried at Seoul National Cemetery. He did not leave behind a vast personal fortune. Corruption surrounded his system, yes, but Park himself did not rule like a dictator trying to become a millionaire. Today, some remember him as the man who exploited workers, crushed democracy, and handed national wealth to the chaebols. Others remember him as the man who made South Korea stand on its own feet. Korean parents who grew up under Park often remind their children, "We worked hard, so you wouldn't have to."